for just a couple of questions here. I guess my first question, do you think the current system is working when it comes to reducing violence in the city jails? This is for the head of COBA, sorry.
No, it's not working.
Okay, and why not?
Well, for so many reasons. I mean, the department has decided to house inmates by gang affiliation, and they've created armies in these housing areas and taken the power away from us to run the housing areas effectively. You got 35 bloods in a house that holds 40 inmates, 50 inmates. How can you effectively control the house? You know, when punitive segregation was banned in 2016 for the young adults, the violence has gone up systematically every year, and the data doesn't support what it is that the council's trying to do.
Okay, and on the housing question, I think Councilor Holden asked this to the commissioner earlier about housing based on similar affiliation when it comes to gangs. The commissioner had said, I think I had tried to explain that it was more complicated because of different affiliations within being blood or so forth, and that it was not their housing strategy. Are you saying that's not your experience, or that's not the experience inside the jails?
Absolutely not. They are housing by gang affiliation on purpose because they thought that by putting the same gangs together, they would reduce inmate on inmate violence. And we see that that is not the case. We're put in an unfortunate circumstance. You know, they want us to be perfect in an unperfect environment, and they have not allowed us to succeed. They put us in a disadvantage right out the gate.
Okay, so I'm going to follow up on that in a second, but do you have concerns? I mean, I think the stated concern here for repealing punitive segregation when they did it a few years ago, the continued concern that plenty of folks have is the effective isolation on any individual, whether it is once you take them out of punitive segregation and they're returned back, and you're including your members, or when they return back to their communities, have to deal with the impact or the effect of that. Do you have concerns about, I'm not even talking about the existing practice, but just any housing practice when it comes to the long-term impact on an individual if you put an individual in long-term isolation, whether that is 23 hours or 20 hours?
Well, Chairman Powers, if an inmate cuts you across your face and gives you 25 stitches, what should happen to that inmate? Because you said you guys want to do away with a practice that will not allow us to separate violent inmates from other inmates. Why don't I hear anybody advocating for the non-violent inmates, for the people that are on the other end of that attack? It seems like we just want to do away with crime. I mean, look, when a crime is committed in New York City, it should be treated no different than a crime committed behind the bars in jail.
Okay, so, but do you have a concern? I mean, I guess do you have a concern on the well-being of an individual if they are locked into a long-term housing with no access to resources programming, and done that over long-term, with minimal hours at a cell?
Chairman Powers, I have concerns for my members that have been assaulted with impunity by violent inmates. You know, I don't understand what's this rush to do away with something, to try and be first in the country to do something that no one has done across the country. And, the violence just continues to soar. So I ask you, what is the data that proves that what you're doing is going to work? The violence has gone up since we've diminished punitive segregation as it is. It's watered down. There are no consequences for inmates that assault us with impunity. And
but I guess, and with respect, I guess that's kind of the question I'm asking, which is, I think I'm hearing two things at the same time. One is, keep the system in place, but also that the system doesn't work. And I guess I'm trying to reconcile those two things. Is if you're, feeling here as that violence has skyrocketed under the current system, why would we not seek to try? I understand your concern that taking something away here may further exasperate that, but it feels like there are other, in addition to that, there should be other tools put in place here to help actually address the issue. I guess my question is, I think the feeling here is we should keep the status quo, but I also hear the status quo doesn't work when it comes to reducing violence. I'm trying to reconcile those two ideas.
Well, Chairman Powers, if you don't commit a crime in jail, you don't end up in punitive segregation. If you don't assault correction officers or other inmates, you don't end up in punitive segregation. You come to do your time and you go home when your time is up.
Is there evidence that punitive segregation is a disincentive to committing violence?
I'm sorry?
Is there evidence that the existence of punitive segregation or the existence of punitive segregation in some form, like in a certain form, is a disincentive to acts of violence?
Well, yes, if there's no consequences, and like I said, the data doesn't support what you're trying to do. If you look at 2016, when it was ended for young adults, the violence skyrocketed. So if inmates know that there are no consequences for their actions, guess what's going to continue to happen? They're going to continue to assault. They're going to continue to commit crimes because there's no consequences happening. The rearrest process for inmates is a joke. Nothing's being done when inmates throw urine and feces and blood in your face. This is what correction officers, this is the reality of what's happening in the jails. And I ask any one of you, if someone did that to you in the streets of New York, what would happen to them? Should they be allowed to stay in New York City? Can somebody on the council answer me that question?
Okay,
if someone cut you in your face, Chairman Powers, should they be allowed to walk the streets of New York freely? Because that's what it is that you guys want to do inside of our jails. There has to be consequences. There has to be.
So what I'm asking is about disincentives towards violence. So what disincentives behavior that can be violent behavior? And I'm asking if there's evidence of that being a disincentive. I understand taking somebody away from housing, where many of your members are, and putting them away somewhere might lead to the desired outcome here, but there is a consequence to that. I mean, I think that's what we're debating here today. Is I'm not at all trying to be disrespectful, and I'm not trying to say any member here, but I guess what we're talking about two things: disincentive and consequences, and on punitive segregation. I believe, and I think many believe, and we can debate where those parameters lie, but that do some form of long-term isolated housing is damaging to an individual. And in this case, we're talking about folks that are going to return to a community, are going to continue to live inside of your city jails or go somewhere else. And I think what we are trying to do is desire for better outcomes. Just to be fair, I mean, I've heard from prior leadership too, that they think the system doesn't work. I understand, I recognize that, maybe taking it away very quickly without it doing anything else may not solve the problem around violence. What I am asking, so let me ask you a different question. Besides the punitive segregation, what are other tools here that you think are the housing one you talked about in terms of gang affiliation? What are other recommendations that you think are not in place right now that would help address issues around safety for people inside the city jails today?
Well, like I said, Chairman Powers, we're all for jail reform. We have no issue, but there's not a balance when it comes to jail reform because it's so lopsided, and everyone is arguing for the inmate population, and no one's arguing besides the union and myself about the correction officers' well-being. Inmates have Game Boys, tablets, and a correction officer can't even get their own gas masks. And this is the lopsided way that the mentality of the council, these are people that are committing violent crimes inside. Yeah, take away commissary, take away their ability to visit. But then you guys don't want to do that because of all the minimum standards that you have. Like I said, the consequences are watered down as they are. And this is why we have a more emboldened inmate. And yes, based on bail reform, we have a more violent inmate that we're dealing with. I mean, think about it. There's 4,800 inmates in our system now, but the violence is skyrocketing because of some of it, I'm sorry, and no disrespect to the department, but some of it has to do with gross mismanagement of the agency. And we're pleading for your help because Unfortunately, you guys don't only represent inmates, but you would hear the Board of Corrections, you would hear the council, and it seems like the only people you want to represent here are inmates. What about us? Who's protecting us? We didn't take, some people feel like it's our job. So we should be doused with urine and feces because we took this job. We should be assaulted with impunity because we decided to take this job. No, we decided to protect and serve our city. All right. But we're asking you guys for help because we need protections too. It can't be just about the well-being of inmates.
I understand that, but I mean, I guess that's first of all, no, it's not acceptable. I just want to be very clear. I'll say it if it needs to be said. It's not acceptable for your members to have any of that happen to them. And we do need to repeat that. I guess, but I guess what was you're here. I mean, you are here at the city council right now, right? If I'm at Rikers Island right now, I can't testify before the city council. That is why there are groups who are doing it for people. You're representing your members here. I'm asking you a question. What are the other recommendations? You're going to go to the board. You're at the council. You have the sponsor of the bill here. You have the chair. I guess my question is, I believe that if you are going to make changes to restricted housing and segregation, you also need to level up in other places as well. You need to change other practices at the department. You've talked about mismanagement. So I'm just asking because I think this is a public hearing for your opportunity to state this. If you feel like it's part of the dialogue that's necessary, what are the other tools that you think or the mismanagement that you think the department needs or is undergoing that needs to be addressed?
Break up the gang houses, lower the inmate to officer ratio. Right now, it's one officer per 50 inmates. Why? When we have approximately 8,500 officers and 4,800 inmates. You could lower the inmate population to have less inmates in each housing area. And like it was brought up here, the department isn't even social distancing when it comes to COVID-19. And we fought and pleaded with the department to put less inmates in a housing area to allow social distancing. So yeah, it has a lot to do with mismanagement. But once again, if we can't have the ability to separate violent inmates, the violence is just going to continue to rise.